Streamers versus podcasts. Yo, so we entering into a whole new wave of new media. It's interesting because, me being in the digital marketing game, in the music industry for, close to 20 years now, I've experienced multiple phases of new media. First phase was us coming out of, magazines, newspapers, newsletters, things like that, and those being the major forms of media. Also, people going on television, 106 in Park, Entertainment Tonight, you know what I mean? Like whatever it may be, Rap City in the Basement, and so it went from that, people getting write-ups in the Source magazine, Double XL, Vibe, all of that. It went from that to then being, the whole blog era and people consume getting this content from the blogs. Bloggers were the new wave. And we even saw during this time where, people at these traditional outlets or people at radio, things like that, looking at blogs, looking at online like it wasn't gonna be the wave that it actually was. Then we went from that era to, I would say, the social media era, where the blog sort of diminished, like the .com became less valuable than it was at one point in time. And let me talk about that too, because websites, during that first era of new media were like the central place, for for any brand. You know what I mean? Like I can remember, working at Geffen Records, even especially like when I was at Def Jam, I remember, there was so many resources being put into like building our website, and the website being like, us having to have like the dopest site on the planet that had all the bells and whistles, all the motion graphics, or I think back then, even before we was calling it motion graphics, it was, damn, what, Flash. So folks was using like Flash media, you know what I'm saying? Then like it really transitioned into motion graphics and, things like that. But the website was the central place where you would find the music, new photos, music videos, any kind of info that you needed on the artist, their online store, all of that. I remember when we were starting to get into, selling D2C, direct to consumer packages, where you could go to the website, buy the album, maybe get a signed version of the album or a vinyl, get a t-shirt, you know what I'm saying? Get the physical copy of the CD, like all of that, you know what I mean? And that came like in this whole package, you know what I mean? That you could buy, which, gave fans just left fans feeling like they had more access, to the artist, made it feel a lot more personal. A lot of times we would even throw like exclusive content into those packages. Like I remember, for instance, with Fabulous, with his projects, the Gangsta Grill projects that he had, when he was Funeral Fab. And so I remember like us coming up with these custom vinyl sets, you know what I mean? Where like the vinyl in itself would be art and you wouldn't even want to put a needle on it, you know what I'm saying? Because it was so dope, I remember Big Boy. I remember us, like making dope exclusive vinyl, like for his project, Big Sean. We did the same thing for the Finally Famous album. And it gave people like these collector's items because I felt like we were getting into the beginning of like that nostalgia vibe, which is so big now. Like you see all my heroes back here, wrestlers, and what I mean, all of that. Like we were coming into like the beginning of the nostalgia era, you know what I'm saying? And so basically now as you fast forward through like the next phase of new media, it became the podcast. And, people like Combat Jack, one of the, big pioneers of that. RP to, RP to him, RP to Dallas Page, you know what I'm saying? Shout out to the internets, you know what I mean? Dallas Page was so dope with it. But these were guys who were taking, like your traditional radio show, like that style of media, but then they were bringing it to the internet. And I remember people thought they were crazy for doing that and, didn't really see a future in that. And that was the next wave of new media, which is where we're at now, where it's podcasts, streamers, you know what I'm saying, and influencers being like the new form of media. You know what I mean? Like a lot of us, like instead of watching the news, we go on Twitter and we get our news from Twitter and depending on like the person that posts it, like Twitter is usually like a valid place to get your content or to get news. You know what I mean? Just like TMZ. If anything happened, if somebody pass away or if something major happens like in entertainment, then a lot of times we looking at TMZ first to see if they posted it because that's, usually gonna validate it. So now we're in this new form of new media. A lot of people that are still embracing the old forms of media are getting mad, are being mad. And I think it's because a lot of people don't see their place, like in the game right now. And so it's like if you're not, willing to evolve, if you're not looking at things from a lens of being a visionary, then you're gonna be stuck and you're gonna be looking at it in one way. I seen online where like folks were saying that labels are sending people to the streamers because it's easier to catch a stream and the people not share information, what I mean, like how in a lot of interviews in the past you would get vital information from these interviews. But I feel like it's a place for both. I feel like the streamers and what we're seeing, with those platforms, it's giving fans like a whole new way of being able to see, their favorite artist, their favorite actor, their favorite person to influence. I mean, I look at when Kevin Hart went on the Kai Cenat stream, and I think he was with him for like 2 or 3 days, and they had Drewski on there and all that. And for a lot of us, that was truly our first time seeing Kevin Hart. I think that lighthearted, no pun intended, as well as just seeing him in a whole different element because we're so used to either seeing him on stand up, like on a stage, you know what I'm saying, telling us jokes, or in a film being funny. But like never seeing like him with kind of the actor veil like cut off and like, okay, word, like this is dude in real life, like this is, what I mean. So I think that I think the streamers bring a lot of value to the game, and I think that there's room for multiple avenues within media. You need the podcast, you need these interview platforms and things like that so that people can go on and share their stories, and they can, and you have journalists and people that's asking the questions, doing research and asking them real questions about their career, their lives, you know things like that, you know what I mean. But then I feel like you also need these streamers and the experience that they're bringing, because also some of these guys aren't even super tapped in to some of these niches. And when I say that in a good way, because they're also them not knowing as much as maybe some of us journalists may know about a certain artist or actor or somebody that they have on their platform. It also just opens like them just being inquisitive and asking certain questions that maybe somebody who has done like some crazy deep research and things like that wouldn't ask, so it brings like just its own authenticity. I saw Jim Jones streaming with Neon the other day, where he had Neon come to Harlem and he was giving them the Harlem experience. Now to some people, they like, man, he got this kid on here, bro don't even know who Dipset is. Like, what makes him valid, to be able to, interview somebody like Jim Jones? And you know what I mean? Like I saw all the like comments or whatever on this stream. But then on the other side, it was dope because this kid has, millions of followers, millions of subscribers, people who follow him and love his content and are influenced by his content. So then him going to Harlem and getting, this whole Harlem Dipset education, it opened him up. It showed his fans a side of him, even though they were clowning him, saying he looked scared, saying he looked nervous moving around Harlem. He definitely had his head on a swivel the whole time, you know what I'm saying, looking behind his back. But it was also dope just in the innocence of it. Like he wasn't trying to be somebody that he wasn't. He wasn't trying to act like he knew too much or trying to even act like, since he has this following over here and they fuck with him, for this certain stuff, he wasn't acting like he was too big to, not know like who exactly Jim Jones was or what Dipset was. So he was open to it and learning. And so, I feel like that's something that's so vital, to the game, is like being like, I feel like, on one end, I can understand and I can relate to, people being upset that, some of these artists, some of these people aren't coming on these platforms, really focus on, hip hop or really focus on their niche. But it opens these artists up to a whole new audience. And the audience that are following these streamers, this audience, they're used to moving around in a way of, they're following these streamers and they're accustomed to spending money, whether it's buying their merch, whether it's being, subscribed to their channel. Like they're used to understanding like, okay, I'm paying $5.99 a month. I'm paying $10 a month, or okay, I'm about to buy this hoodie for $50 or however much it may cost. So they're already accustomed to that. So like when an artist or somebody goes on one of these streamers platforms, it's opening the artist up to a whole new fan base, a fan base that creates conversions. And I think that's one of the most important like aspects that we need to understand, like with these streamers and what's happening here. Like, it's not a bad thing that these artists are going to these streamers and that they're tapping into these platforms. I saw someone say that they feel like the artists, are going on these streams and they're not gaining anything back. You might go on Black Max, or you might go on DDG's stream, record a song, and I've heard people say like, but the streamer's getting so much out of it, but the artist isn't getting anything out of it. But I would disagree with that wholeheartedly, because I believe that the experience that the artist is getting and is giving the fan base, from fans being able to see their process in recording, seeing if these dudes really do go off the top and if they really are punching in and how they do that. For some of these artists that do actually write, just kind of seeing that process and even how that works. I think that the artists are coming out of these streams with something tangible, especially if they put these songs out and then it all, like correlates with them being on the stream, and then the fans, the users thinking that they're cool. I mean, Chicken P was just on Black Max. And even though he didn't record his song, even though he didn't record a song on there, his personality was so polarizing that I know from people that work with Chicken P who said that after he did that stream, his actual streams went up and his profile went up, because people just wanted to know, who is this dude like on here telling bruh that these beats is whack as hell? You know what I'm saying? And wouldn't rap when he's there, Sexy Red rapping, Baby Kia rapping, you know what I'm saying? Baby Chief, like all of them. And this dude, like, who was probably at that time the least known out of all of them that was there, is the one cat with the attitude and saying that he's not gonna rap on those beats. But in reality, when you go and actually tap in to bruh and hear the quality of music that he dropped, and then hear the beats that he's rapping on and all that, like, it's undeniable. And then it like makes sense, like, this why bruh, was on here talking like this. So I think that tapping in with these streamers is so important, and it's giving these artists a whole new fan base with a whole new perspective. Um, look at Jello Ball. Like he went on Neon's stream, and that song, that him going on that stream blew his song up, like to the point to where now bro is, moving around as a credible artist. You know what I mean? Like, just from single-handedly going on that stream and tapping in with bro, where people are saying, but his fan base doesn't match with the fan base who loves hip hop, or, you know what I mean? Or they're not real, they're not really tapped in. But it's like, all of these kids love music, love the culture. And again, like, where these streamers are influencers. So if these streamers, if they're saying that something's cool, then the people that's following them are at least gonna check it out, because while they're watching the stream, they got a bunch of other tabs open. And so you on there, they looking at your Spotify, they looking at your gram, they looking at your TikTok to see like if you active and all of that. And is driving your streams up, is driving your profile, your clout points up, as I like to say. You know what I mean? So I think that the streamers is winning. The streamers is the new wave. And instead of hating on these dudes and instead of like trying to count them out or say that they're not credible, like folks need to get with the program, because this is where it's at. You know what I mean? Like what cats can't do is fall into, like what was happening back when, like I said, when like the earlier phases of new media were popping up, and, a lot of these, people on traditional media platforms, weren't giving them the credibility, or weren't, accepting them to be as credible as they are. And, people gonna fall behind, and you don't want to fall behind. Like the streamers is the wave. But again, I don't think that it's streamers versus podcasters. Like I don't look at it like that. I think that for what you want to accomplish, you need to tap into both. But then what I also say to some of my fellow podcasters, interviewers, content creators, is that what we got to understand is that no longer is, like the online game about, which guests you have on your platform. And that's something that I had to learn. I actually learned that watching Cameron's interview with Elliot Wilson, which that one, it gave me a lot of insight. And it made things make a lot of sense to me, because Cam was talking about how, so Elliot Wilson was explaining how for real journalists, people like himself, how it's getting more difficult for him to get certain guests, to get like some of these big interviewers on the platform. And he was even, talking bad about some of the streamers, because like Nicki Minaj like went on, Kai Cenat, instead, sitting with a traditional journalist like Elliot Wilson. But it's like, bro, like you didn't had your time, bro. Like you didn't, like, bro, how many times was people coming like and having to come to the magazine when you was there, and did you, run it like from that standpoint? So it's like now you just gotta get with the program. You gotta make way for the new wave of things. So what I learned from watching Cam and Elliot converse was, Cam was sharing a lot of game with Elliot on the tip of like, yo, it's about you making yourself hot. It's about you making your platform hot. And that's something that I've seen, Gilly and Wallow do with $1 million worth of game. Of course, Cam and Mace doing that with It Is What It Is. A lot of these platforms that get it, they're doing it. And basically what it is you have to be the attraction. You have to push, dope content, and, be talking about things that people care about. And not only, be dependent on your platform being what brings people in, but it's about you. So if you build a fan base based off of your personality and your whole spin of things, then people are gonna want to come to you. But you have to build it first, you know what I mean, based off of you and based off of your niche and all of that, and not create a platform and then base, what you do on your platform on guests coming onto your show. Because if you do that,